It must have been hard. They said the brakes were broken, but surviving such an accident is a miracle, isn't it? Even though you're paralyzed from the waist down, I guess you're lucky. I was stunned. My mother-in-law, Heather's unbelievable insults, came through my smartphone. My husband Brian had rushed over, worried about me. Together, we were relieved that I was safe. But in the middle of that relief, Heather called with terrifying news. I was confused and overwhelmed. It had been raining that day. I was cycling down a hill to run an errand Heather had ordered. Suddenly, I slipped. The next thing I knew, I was in an ambulance being taken to the hospital. 5 years into my marriage, I had yet to be fully accepted as a daughter-in-law. Heather was always distant, but I had always tried to serve my in-laws and Brian with all my heart. I wanted to bridge the gap with Heather someday. For Brian's sake, I gave it my all. Despite my efforts, her heartless words about my injury broke me. It felt like a bucket of icy water had been poured over my head. Over the years, I endured her cruel words countless times. I told myself she was the woman who gave birth to and raised Brian. But this time, it was too much to bear. I finally decided that I couldn't stay silent anymore. I resolved to confront her about her words. Just then, the hospital contacted us. Brian picked up his phone, looking pale. Suddenly, he shouted in disbelief. "Dad, is that true? What happened to my sister?" The reality that came through the phone was devastating. My sister. She was in a terrible accident. She might become paralyzed from the waist down. At that moment, Heather's eerie smile flashed through my mind. My thoughts raced back to her unusual behavior the previous day. Yesterday, she had asked me to borrow my bicycle. Then today, after my accident, she had called me almost gleefully. Her words now felt deliberate, as though she had foreseen the accident. A chill ran down my spine as pieces of a puzzle began to come together. Heather's voice from the phone earlier echoed in my mind. "It's terrible about the brakes, isn't it? But hey, you're lucky to be alive. Even if you're paralyzed, it could have been worse." Her words had seemed so casual, almost rehearsed. As I stood there frozen, Brian's phone rang again. He quickly answered, his expression tense. He turned to me, his voice shaking. "Mom might have misunderstood something. She thought you were the one with the serious injuries." At that moment, the truth hit me like a bolt of lightning. The puzzle pieces snapped into place, forming a horrifying picture. Heather borrowed my bike yesterday. Today, she assumed I was the one gravely injured in an accident. And her reaction, it all felt deliberate. I couldn't shake the feeling that she had somehow orchestrated it. My thoughts were interrupted by Heather's voice on the phone. "Lisa, are you listening? We need to discuss your future. Since you're paralyzed now, it's time you leave this house." Her words were cold and matter-of-fact. My body trembled as I tried to process her intentions. "Are you talking about my sister-in-law?" A stunned silence followed my question. What do you mean?" I steadied my voice and spoke slowly. "Brian just got a call from the hospital. They said your daughter is the one who's been seriously injured." The silence on the other end of the line stretched on. "That's impossible." Her voice quivered, as though she was finally realizing the weight of the situation. "What are you saying? Sarah? No, that can't be." Her voice trembled, filled with disbelief and panic. "Yes, the hospital called. They said your daughter has been paralyzed from the waist down." I could hear her breathing quicken, almost erratic. No, that's not true. Sarah? My Sarah?" Her tone shifted, turning desperate and confused. She continued muttering to herself, her voice breaking. "Oh, this can't be happening. There must be a mistake." Brian and I exchanged a look. His face was pale, his jaw tight with worry. "I think we need to go to the hospital immediately." "You're right. Mom, we're heading there now. Let's talk when we arrive." Heather didn't respond. Without wasting time, Brian and I rushed to the hospital. As we approached Sarah's room, we could hear shouting from inside. "Get out! All of you, leave me alone! Give me my life back!" We entered the room cautiously. The sight before us was shocking. Sarah was a mess. She was sobbing uncontrollably, her hair disheveled. She threw anything she could grab at the doctors and her father. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity for her. Then, I noticed Heather sitting near the entrance. She was trembling, clutching her knees to her chest. "Heather, are you okay? Please, stay strong." But she didn't respond. Her eyes were vacant, and she mumbled something under her breath. "This isn't my fault. It's not my fault." Her words sent a chill down my spine. My suspicions about her deepened. I turned to confront her, but before I could speak, Sarah screamed again. "What am I supposed to do now? How am I supposed to live like this?" She then looked toward her mother, her eyes filled with desperation. "Mom, help me. Please, tell me what to do." Heather froze, her face contorted with guilt and fear. Finally, she spoke, her voice cold and detached. "There's nothing I can do for you. You're on your own." The room fell silent. The air was heavy and suffocating. Sarah's face twisted in anguish. "How can you say that? How can you abandon me like this?" Her voice cracked, and tears streamed down her face. Brian stepped forward, his voice shaking with anger. "Mom, how could you say something so cruel? She's your daughter." But Heather just sat there, holding her head in her hands, muttering, "It's all ruined. Everything is ruined." The weight of her words and actions hung over us all. Brian and I stood there, stunned by the scene unfolding before us. Sarah sat in her hospital bed, sobbing, while her mother remained unresponsive. My father-in-law, Nathan, finally broke the silence, his voice trembling with anger. "That's enough, Heather. How can you say such things? She needs us now more than ever." Heather didn't respond. She just buried her face in her hands and rocked back and forth. Sarah's cries grew louder, filled with despair. "My life is over. I can't live like this." Watching Sarah fall apart, I felt an overwhelming urge to help her. I stepped forward and gently placed my hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, I've seen how hard you're trying. I know this is beyond difficult, but I'll help you through your rehabilitation." Sarah looked at me, tears streaming down her face. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak. "Why? Why would you help me? After everything I've done to you?" I smiled softly, feeling my own eyes well up. "Because I know you're trying, and that's what matters. We can move forward together." Sarah broke down again, but this time it wasn't out of despair. She cried openly, clutching her blanket, as if finally releasing years of suppressed emotions. I stayed by her side until she calmed down. Later that evening, after returning home, I shared everything with Brian and father-in-law. Both of them sat silently, absorbing the weight of what had happened. I never thought it would come to this. Neither did I, but something has to change. We can't go on like this. A heavy silence settled over the room. The following days were emotionally draining. Sarah was still grappling with her new reality, but she began to open up to me more. We talked during my visits, and though her progress was slow, there was a glimmer of hope. One day, Sarah apologized. It was unexpected and heartfelt. "Lisa, I've treated you terribly. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need to say I'm sorry." "Thank you, Sarah. That means a lot to me." Slowly, the barriers between us began to break down. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah's attitude continued to shift. She began to share more about her childhood and her relationship with her mother. I always thought I had to be perfect for her. If I didn't excel, I felt like I wasn't worth anything. Her voice was heavy with regret and pain. Listening to her, I started to piece together the puzzle of their family dynamics. You were trying so hard to meet her expectations, weren't you? Sarah nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. I thought I was doing everything right. But now, I see. She didn't love me. She loved what I represented. Her words hung in the air, bitter and raw. I didn't know what to say. I simply reached out and held her hand. Over time, Sarah began to trust me more. She even confided in me about the day of the accident. That necklace. It wasn't mine. Mom convinced me to take it, saying it wasn't fair that you had it. My heart clenched as I remembered the pain of losing that precious gift from Brian. I understand now. Thank you for telling me. Sarah looked ashamed but grateful for my response. A few weeks later, Sarah surprised me with something unexpected. I found it. Your necklace. She held it out to me, her hand shaking. I'm so sorry for everything. I hope this can help make things right. Tears filled my eyes as I took the necklace from her. Thank you, Sarah. This means so much to me. That moment felt like the beginning of a new chapter for both of us. Meanwhile, tensions at home continued to simmer. Heather rarely visited Sarah in the hospital. Instead, she locked herself in her room, avoiding everyone. Brian and father-in-law grew increasingly distant from her. I don't know what's going through her mind anymore. Maybe it's time we stopped trying to figure her out. Their words reflected the growing rift in our family. One day, during one of my visits to the hospital, Sarah opened up even more. Lisa, I've been thinking a lot about everything. I need to start over. For myself. Her words were filled with determination. I think that's a wonderful idea, Sarah. She smiled faintly, and I could see that she was slowly finding strength. Meanwhile, at home, Heather continued to act strangely. She rarely left her room, and when she did, she avoided everyone. Brian, Nathan, and I discussed what to do next. We can't keep living like this. Something has to change. I think it's time we confront her. Before we could act, however, the unexpected happened. One weekend, while we were visiting Sarah, the police showed up at the hospital. The tension in the room became unbearable. We've investigated the accident further and found tampering with a bicycle. The officer's words left us stunned. We'd like to speak to the bicycle's owner. My heart pounded as all eyes turned toward me. I don't know anything about this. Despite my protests, the officers insisted on taking me in for questioning. Brian and Nathan looked horrified, but neither could stop what was happening. As I was being taken away, I saw Heather standing at the back of the room. She wore a faint smile, and my stomach turned. At the station, the interrogation began. I repeated that I knew nothing about the tampering. Then, suddenly, the truth came to light. Brian remembered the hidden cameras we had installed months ago. He rushed home to retrieve the footage. The footage clearly showed Heather tampering with a bicycle. When the evidence was presented to the police, they immediately shifted their focus. Heather was brought in for questioning and eventually arrested. The relief I felt was overwhelming. I'm so sorry you had to go through this, Lisa. He hugged me tightly, his voice trembling. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of safety and love. Though Heather was given a suspended sentence, the damage was done. Brian and I decided to leave the house and start fresh. Nathan supported our decision and even chose to divorce Heather. Sarah, too, began to distance herself from her mother. My family is Lisa, Nathan, and Brian now. That's all I need. With her determination, Sarah excelled in her rehabilitation. She even resumed work remotely, regaining a sense of independence. Brian and I settled into our new home, close to Sarah and my father-in-law. On our next wedding anniversary, we celebrated with a peaceful dinner, just the two of us. I wish we had done this sooner. No more interruptions or tension. Just us. It's been a difficult journey, but I'm grateful for what we've gained. Brian smiled at me, his eyes soft with affection. And in that moment, I knew we were finally at peace.